How are we doing, Jets fans? I'm Glenn Naughton with JetNation Radio, JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. We are joined today by Scott Mason of Play Like a Jet to talk a little bit about the Jets' personnel decisions moving forward and how Aaron Rodgers' presence, even though not in the locker room as a player, how Rodgers being around and under contract and his relationships with these guys could affect what the Jets do. Scott, how are we doing today?
Hey, Glenn, how's it going, man? It's funny because usually you're on my show, so it's good for me to finally be on your show. It's kind of like in the old wrestling days when one wrestler from a territory would go to a different territory and wrestle down there for a bit, and then one of the wrestlers from that territory would go to the other territory and return the favor. So it's great to be on with you on Jet Nation Radio.
Yeah, we've done this a couple times, but we should do it more often. And
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. I know you love your wrestling and your wrestling references. I saw a thing on Netflix the other day. I think it was just called The Wrestlers.
hmm
Um, and I thought I won't enjoy this at all, and I turned it on and to give it a shot. And about 15 minutes in, I was like, "This is pretty good." So I'm halfway through an episode. I paused it. I was like, "I'm going to get back to that." It's actually the backstory of what they're doing is there's some interesting stuff there. I don't know
Yeah, it's
if you've caught it on Netflix.
I was gonna say it's funny you said that, Glenn, because I actually was just began it the other day. I didn't like you. I didn't finish the first episode,
Yeah.
but I'd had it recommended to me by a bunch of people who told me, "Yeah, Al Snow bought OVW, and it's about him in OVW trying to like resuscitate the promotion because it's gone through some really bad periods after their affiliation with WWE was cut off and all of that." And people were telling me that one of the highlights of the series apparently is that Al Snow, for whatever you want to think of him as a wrestler, is not a very good businessman. So that creates some interesting scenarios. So I'm looking forward to diving in on it. I know it's 7 parts, so I'm hoping that I can get through it sometime in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, I've heard nothing but good things.
Yeah, and we are halfway through season 4 of Justified for the second time. First time for the wife.
Yeah,
Fantastic stuff. But let's
wait.
dive into the Jets here. So I'm sitting there, I listened to your show this morning. I think it was on my drive home from work. And let's start off right here because this kind of ties into the topic of the show. You had Andy Vasquez from NJ.com on your show, and he was talking about a myriad of topics in the Jets, the struggles in the offense and all of that. But he said that the feeling in the room, in the locker room, that he got after that loss to the Patriots was different than last year, and that last year he said it was almost as if you could sense, you could feel how the team was pissed off with Zach Wilson because Zach Wilson just wasn't performing. He was the reason they were losing. But he said this time around, from what he was hearing the players say and just reading their body language, he got the feeling it was more of that the player mentality right now is we all know Zach's not very good. The coaches need to do more to help him. And, specifically Nathaniel Hackett, we have a story on our front page right now, just a brief blurb, but talking about the personnel groupings that Nathaniel Hackett's been deploying. And listen, if it's the position group coaches in game making the decisions, like this is stuff they have to talk about during the week. Nathaniel Hackett's got to sit down with Ron Middleton and say, hey, make sure we're getting Ruckert in there a fair bit to block because he's one of our better stuff like that. Hey, let's get Miko Hardman a few reps because we saw the numbers the other day on the rep count. We'll get into that in a second. But your thoughts there on Andy Vasquez's thoughts and how that applies to Nathaniel Hackett's situation with the Jets right now.
Yeah, I mean, when Andy said that, I thought it was interesting because, like you said, like last year, the players were just fed up with Zach Wilson. They had enough. And I think what really cemented it, of course, was after that Patriots game when he stood there and said, no, it wasn't my fault and all that, to the point where we now know that his own father called him and said, what were you doing? Are you out of your mind? So that I think was the vibe last year. And from what Andy said, and he was in the locker room, I wasn't obviously the vibe more was along the lines of, yeah, we know this kid is what he is. He's not going to be able to do much, but you got to at least put him in position to try to have some sort of success here. And I think if you look at what happened throughout the game, people will say, oh, if you look at the tape, guys were open, this and that. Well, really what it comes down to is, that Zach is playing scared right now. And I mean, I think maybe, and we don't know this, maybe they told him not to take certain chances, at least at a certain point. But he's playing scared and all that. you got to just go to him. And I think this is kind of what the player vibe probably is, and say, look, just go out there and let it rip, which is what he did on that one drive that was successful. Now, maybe he goes out there, lets it rip, and it results in an interception, or maybe he takes a 15-yard sack or something. But the way he was playing on Sunday, there was just no way they were going to be able to win, because you got to score some points. I mean, look, maybe if the Jets were the 85 Bears, like DJ Reed said they were, you don't have to score many points, but you got to score some points in today's NFL to win. And the way that they were playing, they were not going to score points. So it got it got to the point where he led that 87-yard drive, and he did let it rip. That was what he did. And you heard Tony Romo on the broadcast. He said, this is everything that got Zach Wilson drafted number 2. You're seeing it all right now. Now, obviously, the downside of that is he could have made a mistake or something could have gone wrong, but you saw some great throws. He used his feet to buy time. It was one of those things where you just said, where was this all game? And, you look at McCole Hardman, who, as I joked on Twitter, has apparently the Lanny Poffo contract. And for people that don't know what that means, Lanny Poffo is the brother of the late Macho Man Randy Savage. And when Macho Man Randy Savage signed with WCW in the 90s, they got a great deal because, as Eric Bischoff has talked about, who ran WCW at the time, Macho Man had a Slim Jim sponsorship, which came with him. So they got a fortune in Slim Jim money to take Savage. Basically, Slim Jim paid for Savage's salary. And because of that, they cut a sweetheart deal for Randy Savage's brother, Lanny. He got a 6-figure contract and basically had a no-show job. He never even appeared on TV. It feels like that with Mecole Hardman at this point. They gave him, what was it, $5-6 million, and he's just sitting there on the bench collecting dust after all this stuff we heard in training camp about how Rodgers was going to him, this quick strike offense. He was going to be a big part of this. His speed was going to be a big weapon for the Jets. He's not even playing. Jeremy Ruckert, who did really well blocking in game 1, he's barely out there. And meanwhile, CJ Uzomah is out there a ton, and he's not really doing a whole lot. So you look at it and you say, the personnel groupings, not great. The rotation of players, not great. And yeah, you can say that when you go back on the tape, there were guys that were open, and we all know that. We all know that either Zach was not seeing them, or he was told to keep it super conservative and not even try to go to certain areas of the field. I couldn't tell you that for sure. Either way, whatever it wasn't working, and they had to try something else. And I think that's what it comes down to. You can sit here and say, Zach Wilson can't execute, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine, sure, whatever. We all know he's not good, like you said. We get it. But we do know that there's some things he can do. Like, for example, why were there no design runs? And Damian Wood,
I knew exactly how you were going to finish that sentence when you started it, because I've asked myself that a half dozen times since that game. Why are we seeing no design runs? We know we can run.
Yeah, Damian Woody did a great thread on Twitter, and I recommend anybody who hasn't looked at it, go check it out. And I thought it was very constructive. Like, it was not rocket science. It was like 5 or 6 things the Jets can do, even with Zach Wilson at quarterback, to improve upon what we've been seeing. And one of the things he said was, hey, where were the design runs? I mean, look, it's something he's pretty good at. We talked about this. Look at Mitchell Trubisky when he was with the Bears. He killed the Jets with his legs, and he wasn't being Lamar Jackson or anything like that. He was just, 3rd and 7. Hey, we saw it on that drive before the safety.
Yep.
Zach Wilson escaped on that 3rd down and got a 1st down. So there's a variety of different things they could do, and they're going to have to take more chances. Look, you may lose 30-3 or whatever, but at least go out on your shield. So I think that's the players' philosophy right now, where their thought process is, like you said, yeah, Zach Wilson's not good, but we got to at least try to win these games, because what we're doing is not working. And if we keep doing it, it's going to continue to not work.
And it's so tricky with, you mentioned these, when we go back and we watch the all 22 and this guy's open and that guy's open, as anyone knows who follows me on Twitter, I do try to post some all 22 clips if something jumps out at me. It's not that often that I try to, even if I watch the film and if I see a route concept that I recognize, I don't always highlight it, because there's always that part of me that says, I'm not in that huddle. I have no idea what the call is. I have no idea what was said at practice that week. I have no idea. I don't know if you saw Quincy Enunwa yesterday posted a tweet that somebody had said, why didn't Zach here somebody was open. Why didn't Zach do that? And Anunwa just said, look, a lot of fans don't understand that, there are plays where the receiver isn't part of the progression. Like the quarterback will never get to that guy. And that's just the way it's drawn up. And that's the stuff I remind myself of, because sometimes it is frustrating. And we do watch the film after the game. We're like, oh, this guy over here is wide open. Why didn't you go there? Well, we don't know. And we don't know the conversations that took place previously. So I do love watching the All-22. And if I see something that is, to me, appears to be very obvious, an offensive lineman getting steamrolled, or, a guy running a route that isn't working for him that day. And, why do you keep that corner clearly has that route covered every time. Why don't you try something different? Stuff like that. But when you get into like, I'm going to guess what that guy was supposed to do on that play and tell all the fans Zach Wilson is an idiot because he didn't throw to that guy, that's where I go, and listen, to each his own, like do your thing. But I don't get into that for that reason, because we really don't know what's happening there. But what is happening is that, as you said, they're not taking shots. And that too equally could be on Zach, because some of these guys are open downfield. So we don't know, without being in the building, if Zach just is not confident enough to pull the trigger, or if the team's told him not to do it. But if it's Zach, the team needs to do something about it. And as you said, go to him and say, let it rip today. If you're going to lose, go out like in baseball, right? If you're going to get beat on your best pitch. Don't be Mark Wohlers to give up a home run on a slider to Jim Leyritz in the World Series. Just go with your fastball, So go with what got you there and see if you can make some progress. But in terms of the personnel,
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of the personnel, which we touched on with Hackett, that was, one of the main questions I had for this episode was, will Aaron Rodgers' presence, and should it, impact the Jets' decision-making going forward? And what I mean by that is, no, he's not there, but yes, he's under contract. Yes, he'll be back next year. At least that's the plan. Yes, he's in the Zoom meetings on FaceTime and whatever. But if this keeps up, is Robert Saleh going to say, I'd like to give the play calling duties to somebody else, but how's Aaron Rodgers going to feel about that? Is he going to look at this and say, oh, do I want to be with? And let's make this, I've said this before, this isn't something I'm sort of making this up on the fly. It's great. It's my opinion. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is here if Nathaniel Hackett isn't here. He said at that press conference, he said all the right, all the right sound bites about, I like Saleh and I like what Joe Douglas is building, good young players, but I love Nathaniel Hackett like a brother. And I believe that's why he is a Jet, because of Hackett. Now, if Hackett's not getting the job done, you're certainly not firing him, because then Aaron Rodgers walks away. Do you take play calling duties from him and say, look, you're not getting it done right now. We're gonna hand play calling duties off to somebody else. And, by the same token, Randall Cobb, who we've talked about. Listen, I love Randall Cobb, in terms of proven veteran. He's done a lot in the league, clearly a high character guy. Give the guy a job on the coaching staff and make him the highest paid coach on the staff. I don't care. I have no hate for the guy, but I don't believe he would be in the league right now if not for Aaron Rodgers. And not only does he have a roster spot on the Jets, he's playing 43 reps, while Mecole Hardman is playing 2 on a team that can't move the football. And, he's not a young guy. Billy Turner, another guy. Like, we can argue maybe Billy Turner has some depth because of his versatility, but he's another guy who probably isn't a Jet if Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett don't speak up on his behalf to Joe Douglas and say, here's a guy we've worked with in the past, let's bring him in. He mysteriously comes in. Lazard, nice player, and yeah, he came in before Rodgers, but it was known Rodgers was coming. Lazard reached out to the Jets and said, I want to be there, because he knew Aaron was coming. And I feel like he's a guy who, with Aaron Rodgers, can succeed, but he's not an elite guy that creates a ton of separation where Zach Wilson's going to be able to find him if his accuracy is off. He doesn't need a bunch of separation if it's Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers can thread the needle and get him the football. So there are a lot of guys here. And let's not underplay, because you and I had this conversation the other day, and you pointed it out. And when you think back to Hard Knocks and One Jets Drive, whichever it was on, Aaron Rodgers seemed pretty gung-ho about the Dalvin Cook signing. I mean, he was not against that. Now, he doesn't have the ties to Cook in terms of being a former teammate and all that. But here are the Jets saying, can we bench Randall Cobb? Is that going to upset Aaron? Can we take the play calling from Hackett? Can we move on from Billy Turner? Can we sit? I don't know if you will sit Dalvin Cook because of money he's making. But basically, Aaron Rodgers no longer in the building. but a lot of his friends are. And if they're not getting it done, are the Jets going to hesitate to do the right thing and replace them? Or at least, again, in the case of Hackett, take away the play calling duties if we keep seeing these games that produce one touchdown?
Well, before I get to the Rodgers thing, I just want to circle back to Zach Wilson for a second. There's an old saying in boxing, win or go out on your shield. Now, if Zach Wilson was able to carefully manage the game and move the ball, and they're not going to score a ton of points, but ultimately, okay, at least they're going to be able to be competitive and score when they need to, fine. But like you said, at a certain point, they got to let it rip. It reminds me a little bit of when Diego Corrales was fighting against Jose Luis Castillo. It's a famous fight. It was a phenomenal fight between the two of them. And what I recall happening was, I forget what round it was that this happened, but Diego Corrales was knocked down. He was losing the fight. He was getting beat up. And his trainer, Joel Goosen, looked at him and said, you better get inside on him now, as if to say, look, man, if you don't go in there and go guns a-blazing, you're going to lose this fight. You better go in there guns a-blazing and try to win now. And he did, and he ended up winning. Now, I'm not saying that that's what necessarily would have happened if Zach Wilson went all guns blazing on Sunday, but you got to at least give yourself an opportunity to win. And that kind of leads me to my other thing about Zach Wilson. And I said this on the podcast with Andy, which is, if you'll recall, there was a gentleman, he's still around right now, named Steven Stills, who wrote a song called Love the One You're With. And the chorus goes, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. That's as if to say the Jets love Aaron Rodgers. That's who they wish was here. But the one they've got right now is Zach Wilson. Now, maybe that changes. Maybe they make a trade or they sign somebody or whatever. But for right now, you have Zach Wilson. You know what he's capable of and you know what he's not capable of. And you know what's going to give you at least an opportunity to score points. So you got to operate under that philosophy. You got to understand, like we said, Zach Wilson, just let him create some chaos and see what happens, because otherwise you're going down in flames. You might as well, as I said, win or go out on your shield. As far as the Rodgers stuff, look, I think as far as Hackett goes, this is going to be another test of Robert Saleh's leadership, right? Because if it comes to a point where he feels like he needs to take the play calling away from Nathaniel Hackett, then he's going to have to sit Hackett down in a room, talk to Rodgers and say, okay, look, what's going on right now? Not really working. Maybe we should try something different. And he would have to come up with a way to do it where it wouldn't make both Hackett and Rodgers angry, because obviously if you anger Hackett, you then anger Rodgers, right? Because they're so close. And that's the exact kind of situation that you're trying to avoid. As far as Randall Cobb, look, it's a choice to give him snaps from Hackett, right? Now, is it appeasing Rodgers? I don't know, but it's not working. So that's another situation. What it comes down to with Robert Saleh is he's got to find a way, and this is part of the job. Look, Phil Jackson had this task in a lot of ways when he was at the Lakers, because he had to deal with Kobe and Shaq. And this is why people can disrespect Phil Jackson all they want to, but a lot of people do not understand the monumental task it was to keep Shaq and Kobe in line at all times. And I don't necessarily mean they were badly behaved. I just mean there were a lot of egos involved, and the two of them were often conflicting. And he did a masterful job of that. And that's part of the job as head coach, is you're also really, if you think about it, head shrink, right? So he's got to find a way to balance out saying, look, Randall Cobb, love your brother. You seem like a good dude. Your wife's very pretty. Your kids seem very nice. But we need to get McCole Hardman more snaps here. We need to give Jason Brownlee and Xavier Gibson an opportunity, because Xavier Gibson brings a speed element that you don't bring anymore, that kind of thing. And yeah, if Aaron Rodgers was here, you have that chemistry built in, so maybe that would have helped in a way that it's not going to help with any other quarterback. Billy Turner, whatever. I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter. He's just there as space. But these are all parts of Robert Saleh's job, and that the head coaching thing goes well beyond the X's and O's, as anybody who watched Adam Gase for 5 minutes understands, right? So that's going to be a challenge for Robert Saleh now, is if it comes to a point where he has to take play calling away from Hackett, can he find a way to do it without upsetting the wrong people? If it comes to the point where he has to overrule Hackett and tell him enough with Randall Cobb already, can he do it in a way where it's not going to upset the wrong people and keep everything together. So he's got a lot to balance here, and that's why they pay him the big bucks. Look, there's a huge difference between being a coordinator and being a head coach. We've said it many, many times. That's why so few guys can go from being a coordinator to being a successful head coach. Is Robert Saleh just a really good coordinator who can't cut it as a head coach? We're going to find out soon enough, because there are a lot of tests here for him that I'm sure he didn't think he was going to have to face because he thought he had Aaron Rodgers. And so that's what we're going to see over the next, however many, 14, 15 weeks left, including the bye. So it'll be interesting, but people a lot of times don't take into account the human element. Kevin Sullivan, and I keep bringing this back to wrestling, but I'm saying this because wrestling is a very important study when it comes to human psychology. I've always said, if you understand wrestling and you understand crowd reactions to wrestling, you understand a lot about human psychology. Kevin Sullivan was the booker for WCW. And I'll tell you right now, if you want a fascinating look into a lot of what we're talking about now with egos and balancing different personalities and figuring out how to do things while maintaining structure and order, Kevin Sullivan did a thing on, and it's on YouTube, I believe. It was with kayfabe commentaries. It's called The Last Days of WCW or something like that, where he talks about everything that went wrong in WCW. And you go back and you listen to like the fans that were like, why didn't they push this guy? Or how come that guy? And he'll tell you, okay, well, this guy had this guaranteed contract. And so we had to do at least this many things with this guy. And this guy only had this many dates on his contract. So we could use him on a Monday, but then we couldn't use him again for another month because we didn't have the dates on him. Or this guy didn't get along with that guy. So it was tough to get this guy to cooperate in a program with that guy. So if we wanted to do we had to have this guy do that and this guy do this. And you realize that there's so much more going on, that it's not just, oh, well, why aren't they playing this guy? Why aren't they playing that guy? How come they did this play call? Why aren't, like, there's so much involved that the head coach has to deal with that doesn't get taken into account. And Robert Saleh is going to have to step up and show that he knows how to navigate all those landmines, because if he doesn't, he may be back here next year because of Aaron Rodgers, because Rodgers seems to like him, but he's going to lose the fan base. The locker room's going to get annoyed, and he's going to put himself in a position where, Rodgers or not, he'll be on the hot seat at some point. So it'll be interesting to see how he attempts to handle this going forward, because it's not going to be easy.
Well, you used a word there a couple times that I want to touch on before we wrap up, and that's balance. Because Robert Saleh used that word the other day in his press conference, talking about how Zach Wilson played really well when they were in the hurry up, and we talked about this off the air. Played better in hurry up, played better when they threw early in the series, not starting every series with a run play. And Saleh said, as he mentioned that Zach played better in a hurry up, he said, but then he said, of course, that leads to the natural question: why don't we play Zach in a hurry up more? But you have to find a balance between this, that, the other. And I'm thinking, well, the balance certainly isn't doing it 1% of the time. Saleh was kind of acting like it was a delicate line of, are we doing it too much? Like you're barely, you're one notch above not doing it at all.
Glenn, I have to break in here. We've got breaking news. The Jets have added to their quarterback room. They've signed a veteran, and it's a familiar face, Trevor Siemian. So I don't know what they think that's going to do for them, but sure, why not?
Listen, I said the other day that you would be hard pressed to find a worse option than Zach Wilson right now. Siemian, not a good quarterback. I'm going to have to go back and look. I do remember when he broke into the league with the Broncos, like he had some impressive starts early, and you thought, okay, for his level of experience, but still, it's one of those weird things. Not a good player, but still might be better than Zach. So. Can Trevor Siemian lead 2 touchdown drives? If he can, he's an upgrade.
Right. And listen, Glenn, you heard people kind of hinting about this. It was said that certain guys were reached out to and weren't interested for whatever reason. Now, I assume, just based on timing and knowing a couple of different things that I can piece together, that one of the guys they probably reached out to was Josh Johnson. Now, if you recall, Johnson was here in the past. He's been around everywhere. He knows 16 different offenses. So that would have been easy. I think what probably happened there is when the Ravens released him, the Jets most likely reached out to his agent and said, we'd like to bring him in. But he knew the Ravens wanted to bring him back and decided he'd rather stay there. And it makes sense. It's a more stable. Now, you might have a better chance to play with the Jets, but he probably is sitting there going, well, Lamar did have his injury issues. And on top of that, I'm on a better team with a better coaching staff. He's got Todd Monken. He's got John Harbaugh. They have a better chance to win the whole deal. So he probably felt like, I don't want to leave. Matt Ryan came out and disputed the report the other day. I think Jay Glazer had it, that Ryan had reached out to the Jets. Ryan said he didn't reach out to anybody. He has no interest in going back and playing right now. He's in the booth. He hasn't touched a football in over a year, all that, which common sense would tell you that, right? So people were throwing around the name Carson Wentz. You heard Nick Foles, all that. Nick Foles would have been fine, I guess. What it comes down to is, as you said, the options were brutal. There was no good options, right? People can try to make Carson Wentz into something more than he is. Carson Wentz is terrible. His pocket presence is bad. He fumbles a lot. He throws interceptions, and more to the point, forget just the interceptions. He throws an insane amount of interceptable passes. That's really what'll get you in trouble. If you remember, Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think threw, 15 interceptions that year that he had 30 touchdowns, but he led the league, or was second in the league in interceptable passes that season. So he just got lucky. He got bailed out a lot by Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, right? So you saw that a lot with Carson Wentz. Ever since that injury, the explosive factor he had just wasn't there anymore. But look, Siemian's not good. He's not. And we can talk till we're blue in the face and try to say that he's good. He's not good, but he was probably about the best they could do. And this is why you and I talked about this. They had an opportunity to do something. Look, people will say, oh, well, these guys all went to other places where they had a better chance to start. Josh Dobbs signed with the Browns. He knew he wasn't starting in Cleveland, and he got traded to Arizona 2 weeks ago? So the Jets could have made a move at any point, whether it was Dobbs or somebody else. There were always options as far as better quarterbacks out there. And you can't tell me, bringing it back to Dalvin Cook, you cannot tell me that the Jets couldn't afford a backup quarterback because they gave $8 million to Dalvin Cook. And they did that. And this is just my opinion, but it is based on sort of fishing around and kind of getting a vibe of what was going on behind the scenes. Rodgers was the driving force with Dalvin Cook. He wanted Dalvin Cook. You heard Cook say that Rodgers had been recruiting him since the very beginning, and the Jets made him the best offer. So the Jets, I think, in large part went after Cook hard because Rodgers wanted him, and Cook took the deal because I'm sure he liked the idea of playing with Rodgers, but the Jets made him a much better offer than anybody else did. They could have taken half of that money and spent it on a solid backup quarterback. Now, you can sit here and tell me, I had people say, well, Jameis Winston got in the game and they lost and this and that. Well, okay, fine, but Andy Dalton put up 350 yards passing for the Carolina Panthers, right? Gardner Minshew led the Colts to a surprise overtime win the other day. And Winston actually led what should have been a game-winning drive at the end. They missed a field goal that should have been made. But the point here is that the Jets had a million chances to upgrade and get, and you and I talked about this on the show 1,000 times, Glenn. The Jets had the chance a ton of times to get a real backup quarterback. They never addressed it, and maybe it partly was because of Rodgers, and they didn't want to look. My theory here is that I think probably a big part of the reason why Wilson was QB2 is because Rodgers, A, wanted the Jets to spend the money he saved them on players to help now, as opposed to a backup quarterback. And B, Rodgers probably, he likes Wilson. So he went to bat for Wilson and all of that. But ultimately, this does come down to Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, Nathaniel Hackett, all of the decision makers in that building. They chose to roll the dice that Aaron Rodgers was indestructible or something and couldn't get hurt. And even after telling you the plan was Wilson wasn't going to play, they put him in a position where if something happened to Rodgers, he was going to have to play. And as you and I said, it didn't have to be for a full season. It could have been 2 games, 3 games, 4 games, whatever. But if you're telling me that this kid needs to redshirt, sit behind Rodgers, learn all that, well, he never should have been in a position to play. They should have had a real veteran option here. in case something happened where Rodgers went down even for a couple of games. So they made this bet, and Rich Siemian said this, and people got angry at him for it, but he was right. They made this bet all the way back months ago when they decided to do nothing at the QB2 position and roll with Zach Wilson. Now the options are bad. Siemian, Nick Foles, if he's even willing to come out of retirement, who knows? Apparently Chad Henne told them he had no interest. And nobody's trading their backup quarterback right now for the exact reason that I just said. Jameis Winston had to play Sunday because Derek Carr got hurt. Gardner Minshew had to play Sunday because Anthony Richardson got hurt. Andy Dalton had to play because Bryce Young was hurt. These teams early in the season who aren't planning on giving up their season and forfeiting are not trading their backup quarterbacks right now. You might be able to get one by the deadline, but at that point, it might not matter anymore. And you'd have to overpay on top of it, which whatever, you cross that bridge when you get to it, I guess. But look, the Jets could be 1-4 after these next two games. What are you even doing at that point? Giving up massive draft capital. And the funny thing is, all these people talk about Kirk Cousins. I mean, listen, aside from the Vikings not going to give up on Kirk Cousins after 3 games, let's remember a couple of other things. And I saw you bring this up, Glenn, and very few have. The Vikings get a 3rd-round pick for Kirk Cousins if he leaves just by virtue of a comp pick. So you're going to have to top that significantly to get the Vikings to trade him, not just now, but at any point, right? Because otherwise, what's the point of them trading Kirk Cousins and pissing off Justin Jefferson and the rest of those guys by saying to them, we're thrown in the towel? The other thing is the Jets could very well be 1-4, 2-4, 2-5, 1-5, whatever it is, by the time the Vikings would even consider trading Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has a no trade clause, a full no trade clause. Why would he want to leave the Vikings to go to a team that is 1-4 or 2-5 or whatever at that point? He'll just stay where he is, throw the ball to Justin Jefferson, put up big stats, and then go sign for a big free agent contract in the offseason based on the production he had. So it just doesn't make any sense why the Jets did this. I mean, like I said, Rodgers probably had something to do with it, but they had to do something at some point. They never did. And now this is what we're reduced to. We are reduced to me yesterday texting you that I was bummed that the Ravens re-signed Josh Johnson because I thought he'd be a good option. I mean, when we're at a point where we're sitting here saying, wow, I hope they get Josh Johnson, things have gone very badly. And Trevor Siemian, he is what he is. He's a bad quarterback. He's not even really much of a great backup, but all the good backups were taken a long time ago and the Jets weren't getting one. And so I kept telling people, just be prepared for when the Jets add a veteran backup who it's actually going to be. And that's what this is. So they had to do it. And I'm glad they did. But I mean, if you think this is going to do anything to help the Jets season, I don't really know what to tell you.
Trevor Siemian, looking it up now, career numbers, 42 touchdowns, 28 picks, and a 57.7% completion percentage. So that's what you're getting. That's a guy who may end up starting football games for you. Yeah. And this is life as a Jets fan. That the history, Scott, the history of this team it's file it under. If you didn't laugh, you'd cry. I was thinking it because I did a show a couple days ago where I started off by reading a tweet that I sent back in March, and the tweet was, if the Jets go into this, because it's before the Rodgers deal, I said if the Jets somehow manage to acquire Aaron Rodgers and Zach Wilson is their QB2, and you saw this tweet actually previously because you commented on it back in March. I said this is on par with having Rick Mirer as your QB2 when Vinny blew out his Achilles, and then I start thinking like the history of this team, like how many teams have a history of winning as close to nothing as you can get. And one of the rare opportunities you have where people are picking you to go to the Super Bowl and your quarterback blows his Achilles out on opening day. And the Jets have now done that twice. And then the other sort of historical aspect that something we've seen them do in the past that they kind of are doing with Zach right now. As people said, they should have been going out to get a quarterback a couple weeks ago, but they didn't want to offend him, much the way they handed Mark Sanchez an enormous contract for offending him by, broaching the idea of bringing in Peyton Manning when he was going to become available. The Jets felt bad and gave Mark Sanchez, like It's like different people, but the same stuff. Like, oh, we have a young quarterback, very sensitive, very delicate. We may have hurt his feelings. How do we fix this now?
And Glenn,
It's maddening.
This kind of goes back to what I was saying before, right? Part of being a good head coach and a good general manager is figuring out how to, let's say you were worried about Wilson being nervous about somebody breathing down his neck. Being a good general manager and being a good head coach means figuring out a way to make that move while still maintaining Wilson's confidence and trust. Now, I'm not sitting here and telling you it's easy, but I'm also not getting paid $5 million a year to do this like Joe Douglas or Robert Saleh. That's the job. That's the job. And they didn't do it. And look, we can sit here all we want. I saw it, and I posted this tweet. Dan Hansis from the Around the NFL podcast, who's a huge Jets fan, he said it. He goes, look, Joe Douglas is making me a little nervous now for the first time. Zach Wilson was his guy. I know, he's like, I've talked to enough people to know that. And that's consistent with what I've heard as well. I've heard that Robert Saleh actually preferred to stick with Sam Darnold and build out the rest of the roster. Now, personally, I would have traded Darnold anyway and just gone with some, signed a veteran. And then either if I trade down, I take a quarterback later or whatever. But I probably, I'm saying if I were to have not drafted a quarterback, I would have probably traded Darnold anyway. But either way, the point is people have to start being a little nervous about both Douglas and Saleh if they weren't already, because this was poorly handled. And look, like I said, there's a lot going on the scenes that we probably don't know about, and there's delicate, personalities and egos and all that. But your job, much like it was for Phil Jackson in LA, is to figure out how to maneuver around that. How do you make this move for a veteran quarterback without upsetting Zach Wilson to the point where it affects his performance? How do you make this move while still using Zach Wilson as your starting quarterback and not having him think that somebody's breathing down his neck? I mean, there's a million things we could talk about, but that's part of the job, and they didn't do it. And look, like I said, they left themselves extremely vulnerable, right? This is like when you fortify your house with a security system, but you leave a screen door that's been there for 40 years and can easily be broken into, right? You spent all this money to secure the house, but you left that one spot that anybody who knows how to break into a house is going to be able to get in, right? That's what happened here. They left themselves a giant vulnerability. If Rodgers went down, they were screwed. And that's what you're seeing. And so for people that will say, oh, well, if Rodgers got hurt for any significant period of time, the Jets were screwed. How many times did we say last year that if the Jets had just reasonably competent quarterback play, they could have gone in the playoffs? Do we not think that Andy Dalton, Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, any of those guys, wouldn't at the very least have the Jets in playoff contention?
Yep.
Of course they would. We all know that. And I'm sure inside the building at One Jets Drive, they know it too. But that ship sailed. It's too late. It's over. None of those teams are going to trade you one of those quarterbacks because you need oh, well, sure, we'll punt on our season because you need a quarterback. It's not how this works. So they made their bed. They're going to lie in it with Trevor Siemian and Zach Wilson now. And unfortunately, Jets fans are going to have to just cross their fingers and hope for the best, because it's all there is right now. There's nothing else to say.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so having just mentioned the history of the team, you don't have to go back, that many years to see this stuff. We're literally in a time loop. Like, we are in the exact spot we were last year. You've got Zach Wilson can't move the football and the defense playing well enough to win. So
Yep.
it's maddening.
And now instead of Joe Flacco, it's Trevor Siemian, because you don't even have Mike White. And I'll be honest, if Mike White was here, everybody would have felt so much better, because they would have said, okay, well, not that Mike White's great, but we saw enough of Mike White to say this guy at least is a capable spot starter. He's an option if you need him. He's not a guy you want as your starter, ideally, but he's in that Brissett category where he's capable. And
yeah,
he's not
basically, yeah, he's done more than Zach Wilson has.
Yeah. He's shown you that he can go out there and not be embarrassing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, he's had bad games. I'm not even going to kill him for the Seattle game because he was playing with broken ribs, and it was very clear
Yeah.
very early on that he was hurt. And yeah, he had that game again where he threw the 4 picks or whatever, but he showed you he could step in and play respectable football. And that's all the Jets really could have asked for at this stage of the game with whoever the backup was, and they don't have him now. So it is what it is. They could have made offered a little bit more money to Mike White. They didn't. They could have gotten one of these other guys. They didn't. Josh Dobbs, they could have done that. They didn't. And this is what it is now. So look, Trevor Siemian played for the Bears last year when Fields was hurt. Wasn't good. We all saw what he did against the Jets. Wasn't great. But it's going to be the Zach Wilson and Trevor Siemian. Look, I'm sure Joe Douglas will continue to hunt around for an upgrade somewhere. But like I said, I don't think an upgrade's going to be available until at the earliest around the trade deadline. And by that point, might be too late. So we'll see what happens.
Somebody actually mentioned on Twitter earlier, and the kudos to this fan, the first person I've seen mention it. The Texans actually have 2 veteran backups. They've got Davis Mills, and they've got the guy who used to play for the Eagles. What's his name? Who he all he does is sign $6 million deals and never plays.
Oh, yeah.
Chase.
Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah. So they just names I hadn't heard floated, and I didn't realize Houston. I knew about Mills. I didn't realize they had another experienced veteran behind him. So who knows? Who knows what they do? Who knows what happens? Lots of time between now and the end of the season, but not that much time left for Joe Douglas to make a move that tops even Trevor Siemian.
Yeah, and look, they're running into a buzzsaw now. They're about to play 2 of the top 4 teams in the NFL back to back. Now they're both at home, but dude, we both know they lose those games. This season snowballs pretty quickly, and that's part of why we said the Patriots game was a must win, right? So
yep, and
we'll see.
they almost as
Look,
badly as they played, it came down to the last damn play, right? That's
the Cardinals, who everybody thinks are tanking, just beat the Cowboys, and they're this close to being 3-0 this season. So anything can happen. You never know. So let's not give up hope entirely, but it's not where we wanted the Jets to be at this point in the season when we were riding high with so much optimism mere weeks ago.
It's unbelievable. Life of a Jets fan, my friend. Thanks so much, Scott, for joining us. Go ahead and give out your handles, your social media, and all that good stuff.
Well, Glenn, thanks for having me on. Always appreciate it. Looking forward to having you back on soon. In fact, I'm hoping you'll join me for a mailbag again coming up. I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions this week. So, Glenn, we'll talk later. We'll figure something out, but we'll do a mailbag hopefully this week. As far as where you can find me, Play Like a Jet is available every day wherever you find podcasts. At whatever podcatcher it is you use, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play. Play Like a Jet 1 is the Twitter handle. We've got the store at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com. We've got playlikeajet.com. Our YouTube channel is really cooking, youtube.com/playlikeajet. So plenty of content, and we're like a giant support group, right, Glenn? All of us Jets fans, we're in a giant support group, and we'll get through this together. So keep listening to Glenn, keep watching the videos, keep checking out Play Like a Jet, and we'll get through all of this as a group.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. Have a good one, Jets fans. Until next time.